I am Captain Olivia Pearson, 29 years old, serving in the United States Army. I've commanded logistics convoys through the most dangerous roads in Afghanistan, but nothing could have prepared me for the most brutal battlefield of all, my sister's engagement party. In the humid Charleston air, my sister Amelia, her voice sweet as poison-laced honey, said, "Olivia, dear, where is this fiancé of yours? Or is he busy saving the world somewhere with no cell service?" A ripple of condescending chuckles went through the wealthy guests. My mother added, Now, dear, don't make things up. No one's judging you." My father, by the BBQ pit, remarked to a friend, "She's always had a rich imagination, from serving her country to a billionaire boyfriend." It felt like 100 eyes were stripping me bare, and this borrowed dress suddenly felt as tight as a coffin. They thought they had me cornered. But they didn't know that in my pocket, my phone had just vibrated with a text from him. Coming in hot. Where should I land? If you've ever been made to feel small and invisible by the very people who should love you most, let me know where you're watching from. Hit that like button and subscribe, because this story of betrayal and sweet, sweet justice is for you. The air in my parents' Charleston garden was thick enough to drink. A heavy cocktail of blooming magnolias, salt from the nearby harbor, and the smoky tang of slow-cooking pork from my father's oversized Weber grill. It was the smell of home, or at least, the place I was supposed to call home. Spanish moss dripped from the ancient oaks like old men's beards, and the manicured lawn was dotted with guests in pastel linen and seersucker, the unofficial uniform of Charleston's old money elite. I'd spent the entire 3-hour drive down from Fort Bragg rehearsing my lines, bracing myself. I was Captain Olivia Pearson. I managed supply chains worth hundreds of millions of dollars. I made life-or-death decisions before breakfast. Here, though, I was just Olivia, the odd-shaped puzzle piece that never quite fit the perfect Pearson family picture. My mother, Eleanor, spotted me the second my sensible flats touched her pristine lawn. She glided over, a vision in a floral Lily Pulitzer dress, her smile as bright and hard as a diamond. She kissed the air beside my cheek. "Olivia, darling, you made it." Her eyes did a quick, critical scan of my simple navy blue dress, a loaner from a friend. "Oh, you look comfortable. Not quite like our Amelia, but comfortable." A hot flush crept up my neck. Comfortable. In my mother's vocabulary, it was a synonym for plain, for uninspired, for not trying hard enough. "It's good to see you, Mom," I managed, my voice tight. My father, Richard, looked up from the grill, tongs in hand. "Well, look what the cat dragged in," he boomed, a jovial tone masking the familiar edge of ridicule. "Did your commanding officer give you a weekend pass for this, or did you have to file a formal request?" A few of his golf buddies chuckled. I forced a smile that felt like cracking porcelain. "They let me out for good behavior, Dad." The initial volley was over, but the air remained charged. I felt their unspoken questions hanging in the humid air like gnats. I was a foreign object in their polished world, a discordant note in the perfect symphony of their lives, where value was measured in bank balances and social connections, not in medals or service records. I found a quiet corner near a towering oak tree, nursing a glass of sweet tea, trying to become part of the scenery. But my sister Amelia, the radiant center of this universe, would never allow that. She was holding court near the sprawling porch, a goddess in a pale pink Oscar de la Renta dress, the enormous diamond on her finger catching the afternoon sun and blinding everyone in its vicinity. She saw me, and a predatory gleam entered her eyes. "Olivia!" she called out, her voice carrying across the lawn. She beckoned me over with an imperious flick of her wrist. I had no choice but to walk into the lion's den, a circle of her perfectly coiffed friends. She looped her arm through mine, her grip surprisingly strong. "Everyone, you know my little sister, the captain." She said the title like it was a quaint, slightly embarrassing hobby. "We were just talking about fiancés. Mine," she gestured to a smug-looking man in an obnoxiously expensive watch, "is the brilliant Bradley. But Olivia here has one too. A very mysterious one." "Tell us, Liv, where's this secret billionaire boyfriend you've been telling us about?" The circle of friends turned to me, their smiles a mixture of curiosity and disbelief. The air was sucked out of my lungs. He had a last-minute conference in Geneva. He's flying in later tonight. Amelia threw her head back and let out a laugh, a sound that was less joy and more dismissal. Oh, you're still sticking with that story? That's adorable, truly. Bradley, her fiancé, draped a possessive arm around her shoulders. Don't be hard on her, honey, he said, his voice dripping with condescension. He's probably just some character in one of her online games. The laughter that followed was sharp, a collective sound that felt like 100 tiny needles piercing my skin. My heart was hammering against my ribs, a frantic, trapped bird. My hands, holding the sweating glass of iced tea, felt like blocks of ice. In that moment, surrounded by their wealth and their certainty, I felt utterly, hopelessly foolish. I excused myself, my face burning, and tried to find refuge on the porch. But there was no escape. I overheard my mother talking to my Aunt Patricia, her voice a conspiratorial whisper. She just lives in her own little world, Patty. Always has. We just want her to find some real happiness, you know? Instead of having to imagine things. Then I heard my father talking to one of his friends from the bank. Her whole army career is just a prolonged summer camp, if you ask me. A way to avoid real-world responsibilities. The sting of betrayal from a parent is a unique kind of venom. It doesn't just wound, it poisons the well, contaminating every memory of safety and love you thought you had. The derision from strangers was one thing, but this from them was an amputation of the soul. Just when I thought it couldn't get any worse, my mother appeared at my side, a determined look on her face. She was towing a man in his early 30s, dressed in a crisp Ralph Lauren polo and khaki pants. Olivia, you remember Charles, don't you? His father is a partner at Richard's old firm. I remembered Charles, the man my parents had been trying to set me up with since college. Charles, dear, my mother continued, her voice syrupy sweet. I hear you're still single. Our Olivia is too. She's just a little different. Charles looked me up and down, a slow assessing gaze that ended with an expression of polite pity. He gave me a smile that didn't reach his eyes. It's all right, Olivia, he said, his voice laced with the condescending comfort one offers to a child who's fallen and scraped her knee. Not everyone can be as lucky as your sister Amelia. And there it was, the final, crushing blow. They hadn't just disbelieved me. They hadn't just mocked me. They had brought in my replacement right here in front of everyone. They were trying to fix me, to erase the version of me I'd fought so hard to build and replace her with someone they could understand, someone they could approve of. Standing there, feeling the weight of their judgment, a cold, familiar question echoed in my mind. This cruelty wasn't new. It was a language they had spoken for years. But why? When did I become such a disappointment to them? Standing there in the garden, with Charles's pity washing over me, the humiliation felt fresh, immediate. But the truth is, this wound wasn't new. It was a map of scars layered one on top of the other, etched so deep they had become a part of my landscape. My gaze drifted past the laughing guests, through the French doors, and into the formal living room. It settled on the grand fireplace mantel, a gleaming shrine to my sister's achievements. Her silver tennis trophies stood in a neat row, catching the light next to a framed photo of her graduating summa cum laude from Duke Law. That photo, that gleaming silver cup, was a trigger. It pulled me back through time, back to a sweltering June day in New York, my own graduation from West Point. I can still feel the weight of my dress gray uniform, the wool scratching at my neck under the relentless sun. I remember the immense pride swelling in my chest as I tossed my cap into the air with my classmates, a sea of white against the brilliant blue sky. It was one of the hardest things I'd ever done. 4 years of relentless academic and physical challenges. My parents and Amelia were there, sitting in the stands, or at least their bodies were. Later that evening, at a high-end steakhouse in Manhattan that my father had chosen, the celebration felt hollow. My parents spent most of the dinner complaining. My God, the humidity, my mother said, fanning herself with a menu. You'd think for what this place costs, They could afford some better air circulation. It was just a long, expensive parade, if you ask me, my father added, swirling the red wine in his glass. He finally turned to me, his expression not one of pride, but of weary concern. Well, I hope you know what you're getting into, Olivia. That diploma isn't going to get you a seat in a corporate boardroom. There was no congratulations. No, we're so proud of you. Amelia, ever the pragmatist, slid a beautifully wrapped gift across the table. It was a ridiculously expensive set of La Mer skincare. To preserve that face, she'd said with a tight smile. The army has a way of aging a woman. The gift wasn't a celebration of my achievement, it was a correction, a reminder of the feminine standard I was already failing to meet. I felt so small. My monumental accomplishment shrinking under their casual disdain until it was nothing more than an inconvenient detour on their well-paved roadmap for my life. That feeling of erasure became a recurring theme. 2 years later, I came home on leave, my heart thrumming with a quiet, profound sense of achievement. I had just been awarded the Bronze Star. Not for valor in combat, but for my mind. For redesigning a logistics network in a hostile province, a system that saved the military millions of dollars, but, more importantly, demonstrably reduced soldier exposure to IEDs. It was the proudest moment of my professional life. I found my family in the living room. My mother was scrolling through her phone, looking at photos from Amelia's recent shopping trip to Paris. My father was watching some financial news channel. Hey, I started, my voice hesitant. I have some news. I pulled the velvet case from my bag and opened it. The metal lay nestled inside, its bronze finish catching the lamplight. My mother glanced up from her phone, her eyes barely registering it. Oh, that's nice, dear, she said, her attention immediately snapping back to a picture of Amelia posing in front of the Eiffel Tower. My father took the case from my hand. He held the metal, squinting at the inscription. He turned it over a few times as if it were a strange coin he'd found on the street. Well, he said, handing it back, at least it's made of real metal. And that was it. That was the entirety of their reaction. Later, I found the case tucked away in the back of a junk drawer in the guest room, shoved behind old batteries and dried-up pens. My Bronze Star, a symbol of my dedication and intellect, treated like a cheap souvenir. The dismissal was most potent during the holidays. Christmas at the Pearson household was an exercise in theatrical gift-giving. One year, Amelia got the keys to a new Lexus, wrapped in a giant red bow. The next, it was a Hermès Birkin bag. My gifts were always practical. A check tucked inside a generic card, a Visa gift card. The message was clear, whether they intended it or not. We don't know you. We don't know what you like, what you need, what makes you happy. So here's some money. Go figure it out yourself. The year I turned 25, I had a short window of leave right over Christmas. I saved up my money and booked a surprise flight home, imagining their shocked, happy faces. I walked up the driveway of my childhood home on Christmas Eve, my duffel bag slung over my shoulder, my heart full of anticipation. But the house was dark, silent. A small, neatly printed note was taped to the front door. It was from the mailman, a notice of a mail hold. A quick search on my phone revealed the truth. My entire family was in Aspen, posting smiling, snow-dusted photos from the ski slopes. They had gone on a family vacation and hadn't thought to tell me. I spent that Christmas alone in the cold, empty house, eating takeout pizza, and watching the cheerful lights twinkle in the neighbors' windows. Perhaps the most cutting moment, though, came from Amelia, cloaked in the guise of sisterly advice. She'd cornered me in her old bedroom one visit, a space that was more of a museum to her own success than a place of rest. Olivia, I love you, which is why I have to be honest, she began, examining her perfectly manicured nails. You're wasting your life. Look at you. Your skin is weathered, your clothes are functional. You're never going to find a good man if you keep playing this tin soldier game. Just get out. Bradley can find you a decent office job, something respectable. Every word was a small, precise stab. She wasn't offering help, she was issuing a verdict. My life, my choices, my very identity, they were all wrong. A mistake that needed correcting. The memories flooded back, each one a fresh wave of that old, familiar ache. It was never one single thing. It was death by 1,000 cuts, a slow, systematic dismantling of my self-worth. And as I stood there in the garden, watching them all, I finally understood. My invisible boyfriend wasn't the real issue. My career wasn't the issue. My dress wasn't the issue. I was the issue. My very existence was a deviation from their perfect plan. My mind flashed to a memory that I often clung to like a life raft. My first commanding officer, a tough-as-nails major who saw right through me. After a particularly grueling training exercise, she'd pulled me aside. "Pearson," she'd said, her voice stern but fair. "In here, nobody cares whose daughter you are. They only care if you can do your job, and you get the job done." That was my lifeline. The first time someone had seen my value for what it was, not for what they wanted it to be. If you've ever had that one person, a teacher, a boss, a friend, who saw your true worth when your own family couldn't, I need you to do me a favor. Please hit the like button for them, and in the comments, just type, "I was seen." Because we all deserve to be truly seen. That one piece of validation from the outside world can be the only thing that keeps you from drowning. For me, it was. Because back home, I was always sinking. My commanding officer was right. Back home, I was a disappointment, a problem to be solved. But in the Army, I wasn't Richard and Eleanor's daughter. I was just Pearson. And Pearson got the job done. That was the world I built for myself, brick by painful brick. A fortress of solitude where my worth was measured not by who I knew, but by what I could do. The first brick was laid every morning at about 500 hours. The sharp blare of my alarm would cut through the pre-dawn stillness of my small apartment off base at Fort Bragg. Before the North Carolina sky had even begun to pale, I'd have my running shoes laced, pounding out 5 miles on the quiet asphalt roads. It wasn't a punishment, it was a ritual. It was the time I cleared my head, the steady rhythm of my feet on the pavement, a metronome for the ordered, disciplined day that would follow. My office wasn't a corner suite with a view. It was a windowless, fluorescent-lit room in the heart of the Logistics Command Building. The decor consisted of topographical maps tacked to corkboards, whiteboards covered in complex flowcharts, and the constant low hum of computer servers. There was no glamour here. There was only the immense, crushing weight of responsibility. My job was to make sure that thousands of soldiers had the fuel, the ammunition, the food, and the medical supplies they needed to stay alive. It was a puzzle with a million moving pieces, where a single miscalculation could have catastrophic consequences. And I was good at it. In this world, I wasn't little Olivia. I was Captain Pearson. When I walked into a briefing room, junior officers and seasoned sergeants alike would straighten up, not out of fear, but out of respect. I remember one afternoon, a young sergeant came into my office, his face etched with panic. A critical shipment of replacement parts for their vehicle fleet was stuck somewhere in Poland, tangled in a web of customs bureaucracy. "Ma'am, we're dead in the water without those parts," he'd said, his voice tight with stress. I didn't offer platitudes. I pulled up the manifests, made 3 phone calls, and navigated a maze of international shipping regulations. Within an hour, I'd found a solution. I watched the relief wash over his face. "Thank you, ma'am," he'd said, his gratitude genuine. That was my currency. That was my validation. It wasn't a Lexus or a Birkin bag. It was the earned trust of the soldiers who depended on me. Just last week, I'd received an email from a young corporal I'd mentored before his deployment. "Ma'am," it read, "that risk mitigation protocol you taught us. We used it yesterday. The convoy ahead of us got hit by an ambush right where our intel said it was clear. Your method made us double-check. Captain, you saved our lives." An email like that was worth more than every hollow compliment my family had ever failed to give me. It was in this world of logic and consequence that I met Alexander. It was 3 months ago, at a NATO joint exercise in Germany. I was in a cold, sterile conference room at Ramstein Air Base, presenting my analysis on a critical vulnerability in the transatlantic supply chain. I was the only woman at the presenter's podium. The room was full of high-ranking officers from a dozen countries, and one civilian. He sat in the front row, dressed in a perfectly tailored charcoal suit that stood out in the sea of military uniforms. He didn't just listen, he absorbed. When I finished, he didn't offer polite applause, he asked a question. A brilliant, incisive question that cut to the very heart of the problem. A question that showed he understood the strategic implications better than half the colonels in the room. After the session, he introduced himself. Alexander Sterling, he said, his handshake firm, his eyes a startlingly intelligent shade of blue. That was one of the most impressive logistical analyses I've ever seen. He invited me for a coffee at a small traditional German gasthaus in the nearby town. We sat for hours, not talking about family or money or social status, but about drone technology, predictive analytics, and the ethics of artificial intelligence in warfare. It was the most exhilarating conversation I'd ever had. He saw my mind first. To him, my greatest asset wasn't my face or my family name, it was my intellect. Our relationship grew from there, across time zones and encrypted video calls. He was always somewhere else, London, Dubai, Tokyo. But he always made time. He'd listen, his focus absolute as I described the challenges of my day. He never belittled my work. He was fascinated by it. "Olivia," he said once, late at night, his face clear on my laptop screen while he was in a hotel room overlooking a glittering city. "The way you solve these multivariable problems, it's more complex than any corporate merger I've ever navigated. You're extraordinary." To be seen like that, to be valued for the very things my family dismissed as a prolonged summer camp, was a profoundly healing experience. He never made me feel like I needed to be fixed. Which brought me to today. Just hours before I started the drive to Charleston, we had one last video call. He was in his office in Geneva, the sky behind him already dark. "I'm so sorry I can't be there from the start, Liv," he said, his voice filled with genuine regret. "This summit is a nightmare of bureaucracy." "It's okay, I get it," I said, trying to sound more cheerful than I felt. "No, it's not okay," he insisted. "But I promise I'll wrap this up and get on a plane. I want to meet the people who raised such an incredible woman." I just gave a sad little smile. "Oh, you'll meet them," I thought. "You'll see soon enough." His words, meant to be a compliment, felt like a bitter irony. He had no idea what he was walking into. But his promise was the one flickering candle of hope I carried with me as I drove south into the heart of the battlefield I called home. The humiliation had reached its crescendo. Amelia, playing to her audience of sycophants, seized my left hand. She held it up for everyone to see, the bare fingers a testament to my supposed delusion. "See?" she announced, her voice dripping with mock pity. "No ring. Not even a phantom ring. I told you, she makes these things up." Her friends tittered, their laughter a cruel symphony. In that moment, I felt a familiar, sickening spiral of despair. I was cornered, exposed, and utterly alone. Just as I was about to snatch my hand back, a deep vibration started in my pocket. My phone. A text message. But before I could even reach for it, a new sound began to intrude. A sound that didn't belong in this manicured southern garden. It started as a low, deep thrumming, a rhythmic whump, whump, whump that seemed to vibrate up through the soles of my feet. The smooth jazz trio playing near the porch faltered, the saxophone letting out a confused squawk. Conversations died down as heads turned, guests scanning the flawless blue sky. "What on earth is that noise?" Aunt Patricia asked, squinting into the sun. My father, ever the unflappable patriarch, took a confident sip of his bourbon. "Probably a medevac from the hospital over on Calhoun Street," he declared, dismissing the interruption. "Nothing to worry about." But it wasn't the distant, fading sound of a medical helicopter. This sound was growing, getting closer, deeper, more powerful. It was a physical presence pressing down on the humid air, shaking the delicate petals of my mother's prize-winning azaleas. All eyes turned upward. And then it appeared. Cresting over the tops of the ancient moss-draped oak trees was a helicopter. But it wasn't a clunky utilitarian aircraft. It was a machine of immense power and elegance, a custom Sikorsky S-76, painted a menacing glossy black. It moved like a panther, sleek and predatory, its presence an immediate and shocking violation of the party's genteel tranquility. It circled once, a confident survey of the terrain, before it began its descent onto the sprawling back lawn, the very spot my parents had reserved for Amelia's future wedding marquee. The downdraft from the rotor blades hit us like a hurricane. Chaos erupted. The linen tablecloths on the buffet tables were whipped into the air, sending shrimp cocktails and miniature crab cakes flying. My mother's elaborate floral centerpieces, the ones she'd spent a fortune on, were torn apart, their expensive petals scattered like confetti. Champagne flutes toppled over, their contents splashing across designer dresses. The male guests grabbed for their hats, the women shrieked, shielding their faces as a tornado of grass clippings and loose napkins swirled around them. Amelia's perfect party, her flawless stage, was being utterly demolished. And through it all, my family stood frozen, paralyzed with disbelief. My father's jaw was slack, his bourbon forgotten. My mother's face was a mask of pale, horrified shock. And Amelia. Amelia was statuesque, her mouth a perfect O of outrage, her expensive Oscar de la Renta dress now whipping violently around her legs. She had completely forgotten about me. I, however, was the only calm one in the storm. Because as the helicopter settled onto the grass, I saw it. A small, discreet logo painted on the side. 2 stylized, interlocking letters. The emblem of Sterling Dynamics. And I knew. The engine whined down, the roar of the rotors slowing to a manageable whir. The side door slid open with a smooth, expensive hiss. A man emerged, stepping down onto the lawn. He was tall and broad-shouldered, dressed in a Tom Ford suit that probably cost more than my car. He moved with an unshakable confidence, completely unfazed by the chaos he had created. He surveyed the scene not with apology, but with the calm authority of a man who was used to making an entrance. It was Alexander. I felt a slow smile spread across my face for the first time all day, a genuine, triumphant smile. I turned to my mother, who was staring at him as if he were an alien who had just landed. I leaned in and whispered, my voice clear and steady above the dying thrum of the engine. That's him, Mom." Alexander's eyes scanned the crowd of shocked faces for a fraction of a second before they found me. And then, they locked on. He ignored everyone else as if they were merely part of the scenery. My father, my mother, my sister, the 50 stunned guests, none of them existed. He strode directly toward me, his path purposeful, his gaze never wavering. He stopped in front of me, the scent of expensive cologne and the faint, thrilling smell of jet fuel surrounding him. He didn't say a word. Instead, he gently took my face in his hands, his thumbs caressing my cheeks, and he kissed me. It wasn't a polite social peck. It was a deep, possessive, all-consuming kiss, right there in the middle of the ruined party, in front of my stunned family and their scandalized friends. It was a kiss that said, "She is with me, she is mine, she is protected." It was a declaration of truth, a public and undeniable refutation of every lie and every insult they had hurled at me. When he finally pulled back, my head was spinning. He rested his forehead against mine, his voice a low, protective rumble meant only for me. "I'm here now," he whispered. "I won't let anyone hurt you again." Tears of relief, not shame, pricked my eyes. I just nodded, unable to speak. Then, with his arm still wrapped securely around my waist, holding me tight against his side, he turned to face my family. He offered them a devastatingly charming, utterly unapologetic smile. "Hello, everyone," he said, his voice calm and clear, carrying easily across the now silent lawn. "I'm Alexander. Sorry I'm late." The silence that fell over the garden was absolute. It was heavier and more profound than the roar of the helicopter that had preceded it. 50 guests, my entire family included, stood frozen, their faces a gallery of shock and confusion. Alexander's calm apology, "Sorry I'm late," hung in the air, a masterpiece of understatement. My family didn't just hear an apology, they heard a language they understood better than love or respect, the language of power. Before anyone could gather their wits, a quietly efficient assistant in a tailored suit emerged from the helicopter carrying several exquisitely wrapped gift boxes. The top one was a signature Tiffany blue, the other a deep, rich red that screamed, Cartier. He presented them to Alexander, who then turned to my sister and her fiancé. I didn't want to arrive empty-handed, Alexander said with that same disarming smile. A little something to celebrate your engagement. Amelia, for the first time in her life, looked utterly flustered. She and Bradley took the boxes numbly. In the dead quiet, the sound of tearing gift wrap was unnaturally loud. Bradley opened his first. Inside, nestled on a silk cushion, was a watch. But not just any watch. I saw Bradley's eyes widen, a flicker of avarice and disbelief in them. It was a Patek Philippe, a limited edition model I knew he'd only ever seen in magazines. I heard him whisper hoarsely to my father, his voice cracking, This is worth more than my condo. Amelia opened hers next. Inside was a Harry Winston diamond necklace, a river of light that glittered violently in the afternoon sun. It made the massive diamond on her finger look like a child's toy. Alexander simply gave a slight, dismissive shrug. Just a small token of our congratulations. The message was brutally effective. The very symbols of wealth and status my family worshipped, the things Bradley flaunted to assert his dominance, were, to Alexander, nothing more than casual trinkets. He hadn't just joined their game. He had proven that he was playing in a league they couldn't even comprehend. It was Bradley who tried to recover first, attempting to reclaim some semblance of control by steering the conversation to his own turf. He puffed out his chest, adjusting the cuff of his own, suddenly inadequate, watch. So, Alexander, he began, his voice a little too loud. Impressive entrance. You must do well for yourself. Are you in finance? The market's been volatile. I've been making a killing in tech futures, myself. Alexander turned his full attention to him, his expression one of polite interest. I'm not in finance, no, he replied smoothly. And I don't really follow the market. He paused for a beat, letting the silence stretch just long enough to be uncomfortable, before delivering the final, devastating blow. The market follows me. A few guests gasped. Bradley's face went from smug to ashen in a single second. He just stood there, his mouth slightly open, completely and utterly neutered. He had tried to engage in a pissing contest and had just been drowned by the ocean. But the true reckoning was yet to come. It was my father, his banker's mind finally connecting the dots, who pieced it all together. He had been staring at the subtle, interlocking SD logo on the helicopter. His face, which had been pale with shock, was now turning a sickly shade of gray. He took a stumbling step forward, his voice a disbelieving croak. Sterling Dynamics? It can't be. You're Alexander Sterling. Alexander simply nodded, his gaze steady. My father spun around to face my mother, his voice rising in panic. Eleanor, he hissed, grabbing her arm. This is the man who completed a hostile takeover of Lockheed Martin's entire aerospace division last month. The deal was worth billions. There were no pictures of him in the press, no interviews. His eyes widened as the horrifying realization dawned on him. There was nothing in the papers because he owns the papers. A collective, horrified silence fell upon the Pearson family. The full weight of their miscalculation crashed down on them. They had mocked me, sneered at me, accused me of inventing a boyfriend. They had pictured some nerdy government contractor from the Pentagon. They had never, in their wildest, most materialistic dreams, imagined that the man I was dating didn't just work with the Pentagon, he was the man who technologically owned it. My Aunt Patricia, never one to be left out, finally found her voice. My goodness, Mr. Sterling, what is it that you do, exactly? Alexander's smile never wavered, but now he turned the full force of his power not upon himself, but upon me. Please, call me Alexander, he said, his arm tightening around my waist. He then looked directly at my parents. What I do is find a talent. I met Captain Pearson when she was giving a presentation on logistical solutions. Her analysis, he said, his voice ringing with genuine respect, has since saved my company close to $500 million in development costs. More importantly, Her risk mitigation models have increased soldier survivability rates in our simulations by 15%. Your daughter isn't just an officer, she is a national asset. He held their gaze. You must be immeasurably proud. The words hung in the air, a stunning indictment of their every action. He had used their own language, money, results, status, to prove my worth. He had shown them that the very thing they had ridiculed was the source of my greatest value. And then, before they could even begin to process this, he turned back to me. In front of everyone, he released my waist and smoothly went down on one knee. The crowd gasped as one. My heart stopped. Olivia, he said, his voice, now gentle, but still carrying across the lawn, was aimed only at me. Your family thought I wasn't real. They thought our love wasn't real. He reached into his jacket and produced a small velvet box. I want to prove them wrong. About everything. He opened the box. Inside, resting on a bed of black silk, was the most magnificent ring I'd ever seen. A flawless canary yellow diamond, cut into a radiant square, flanked by two smaller white diamonds. It blazed under the Charleston sun, a star of impossible brilliance. Captain Olivia Pearson, he said, his eyes full of a love so real it made my knees weak. Will you do me the honor of becoming my wife in a very, very real way? Tears, hot and sudden, streamed down my face as a sob of pure, unadulterated joy escaped my lips. I could only nod, my whole world shrinking down to this man, this moment, this perfect, beautiful, undeniable truth. It wasn't just a proposal, it was a coronation. It was the ultimate vindication. As I whispered, yes, the world seemed to fall away. There was only Alexander, his eyes reflecting a universe of devotion I never thought I'd be the center of. He slid the heavy, magnificent ring onto my finger. It fit perfectly. For a moment, it felt like a shield, a tangible piece of armor. As he stood up, taking my hand and pulling me to my feet, I felt it. Not just the weight of the ring, but the weight of my own power returning to me. The years of feeling small and apologetic began to evaporate under the heat of my newfound certainty. The spell was broken. The first to try and piece it back together was my mother. The shock on her face quickly melted away, replaced by a frantic saccharine smile. She rushed forward, arms outstretched as if to pull me into a celebratory hug. Oh, Olivia, darling. Alexander. My goodness, you're just so impressive, she gushed, her voice a pitch higher than usual. She turned to me, her eyes wide with feigned maternal reproach. Why on earth didn't you tell us sooner? Letting your poor mother worry like that? Amelia was right behind her, a brittle smile plastered on her face, trying desperately to regain her footing as the party's gracious host. Yes, Liv, honestly, she chimed in, linking her arm through Bradley's. We were just teasing you. You know how we are. It was all in good fun. Good fun. The words echoed in the space where the cruelty had just been. They were trying to rewrite history, to shrink their monstrous behavior down to a harmless little joke, a simple misunderstanding. They were trying to pull me back into the familiar dynamic, back into the role of the overly sensitive daughter who just couldn't take a little ribbing. But the person who had accepted that role for 29 years was no longer present. I looked at my mother's outstretched arms, at her desperate, smiling face, and I felt nothing. No anger, no sadness, just a profound and chilling clarity. I gently took her hands and moved them away from me. No, I said. My voice didn't tremble. It was low, steady, and as cold and hard as steel. It was the voice of Captain Pearson issuing a direct order, and it silenced them instantly. I let my gaze travel from my mother's stunned face to my sister's, then to my father, who was still standing by the grill like a monument to his own irrelevance. This wasn't a joke, I continued, my voice cutting through the silence. For my entire life, you have all made it perfectly clear what you think of me, of my choices, of my life. Today, you said it louder than ever, in front of all these people. I paused, letting the weight of my words settle. And I heard you. I finally, truly heard you. I turned to Alexander, who had been standing silently by my side, a bastion of unwavering support. "Let's go," I said. It wasn't a request, it was a command. He nodded once, his eyes full of understanding. We turned to walk toward the helicopter, a united front leaving the battlefield behind. "Olivia, you can't just leave." My mother's voice was sharp with panic now, the fake sweetness gone. She grabbed my arm, her grip surprisingly tight. "What will people think?" Her final plea. Not, "Don't go, I love you." Not, "I'm so sorry." But, "What will people think?" It was the story of my life, summarized in a single, desperate question. Her concern wasn't for me, it was for the pristine image of the Pearson family, which was now cracking under pressure. I didn't even look at her. Alexander did. He gave a subtle, almost imperceptible nod to his assistant, who was still standing discreetly near the helicopter. The young man immediately strode forward. He approached Amelia and held out a thick, cream-colored envelope embossed with the logo of a prestigious private bank. Amelia stared at it, bewildered. "What is this?" "A wedding gift," Alexander said, his voice calm and even. "From Olivia." Amelia tore it open. Inside was a single cashier's check. I couldn't see the amount from where I was standing, but I saw the color drain from my sister's face. I saw her hand begin to shake. "It should cover the entire cost of your wedding and the honeymoon," Alexander continued, his tone matter-of-fact. "Consider it a final contribution. We owe you nothing." That was it. The final severing blow. They had used money as a tool of approval and disapproval my entire life. And now, we were using it to buy my freedom. We walked away. This time, no one tried to stop us. We climbed into the leather-appointed cabin of the helicopter, the door sliding shut, sealing us off from the wreckage of the party. As we lifted off the ground, the powerful thrum of the rotors was the sound of my own liberation. I looked down through the window. The scene below was like something from a movie. The once perfect garden was a swirl of chaos, the guests murmuring in confused little clusters. I saw my father and mother in the midst of a furious, gesturing argument, the blame game already in full swing. And I saw my sister, Amelia, standing alone in the middle of the ruined lawn, motionless, clutching that piece of paper as if it were both a winning lottery ticket and a death certificate. For the first time in my life, a scene of my family's dysfunction didn't cause a pang of pain in my chest. There was no sadness, no longing. There was only the quiet, expansive feeling of relief. As the helicopter banked and turned out over the Ashley River, the sprawling mansion shrinking below me, I knew I was free. Have you ever had that one moment, that final straw, where you knew you had to walk away to save yourself? It's a terrifying and incredibly liberating feeling. If you know what I'm talking about, please hit that like button as a salute to your own strength. And in the comments, just write one word, freedom. Because that's what this moment was all about. As I leaned back into my seat, I felt a hand cover mine. It was Alexander's. His grip was warm and strong. I looked at him, and he just smiled. A quiet smile of profound understanding. I had spent my life fighting battles, but for the first time, I felt like I had finally won the war. I was finally, truly, free. The flight from my parents' house was short, a 10-minute journey that felt like crossing into another dimension. We landed softly on the rooftop helipad of the Dewberry Hotel. Its chic, mid-century modern architecture a stark contrast to the old-world stuffiness we'd just escaped. A private elevator took us directly to the presidential suite, the John C. Calhoun penthouse. The moment the heavy suite door clicked shut behind us, the silence was absolute. It was a deep, luxurious quiet that absorbed all the noise, all the chaos, all the cruelty of the past few hours. Floor-to-ceiling windows revealed a breathtaking panorama of Charleston glittering below, the church steeples and the Ravenel Bridge illuminated against the deep indigo of the evening sky. For the first time all day, I felt like I could breathe. And then, the fortress I had so carefully constructed around my emotions for the past 29 years finally crumbled. The adrenaline that had sustained me through the confrontation vanished, leaving behind a profound, bone-deep exhaustion. I stumbled over to a plush velvet sofa and collapsed, my body suddenly feeling too heavy for my own skeleton to support, and I began to cry. It wasn't the quiet, dignified tears of a soldier. It was a raw, ugly, gut-wrenching sob that tore its way up from a place deep inside me I didn't even know existed. It was a storm of every dismissive comment, every forgotten achievement, every lonely Christmas, every ounce of shame and rage I'd swallowed down for nearly 3 decades. It all came pouring out in a flood of shuddering, gasping breaths. Through it all, Alexander was just there. He didn't try to fix it. He didn't offer empty platitudes like, "It's going to be okay." He simply disappeared for a moment and came back with a glass of water, placing it silently on the marble coffee table. He took a soft gray cashmere throw from the back of an armchair and gently draped it over my shoulders. Then he just sat in the chair opposite me, a quiet, steady presence in the storm. His silence was the most compassionate thing anyone had ever given me. It was permission. Permission to be broken. After what felt like an eternity, the sobs subsided into hiccuping breaths. I felt raw, empty, but strangely peaceful. "In the army," I said, my voice hoarse, "they train us in mental resilience. They teach you that acknowledging the wound is the first step to treating it." "Sounds like a smart policy," he said softly, his voice a calm anchor in the quiet room. I looked at him, my fiancé, this incredible, impossible man who had appeared out of the sky. "They couldn't find you online, you know," I murmured. "That's why they were so sure I was making you up." He nodded, his expression somber. "I know, and I'm sorry that my privacy put you in that position, Olivia." He leaned forward, his elbows on his knees. "A few years ago, the family of a business associate of mine in Silicon Valley was targeted in a violent kidnapping and ransom attempt. It was brutal. After that, I made a decision. For the safety of my employees, my partners, and the sensitive nature of our defense contracts, I hired the best cybersecurity firm in the world to create a digital blackout. They scrubbed my existence from the public internet. It's not a secret, it's a security measure." He looked me directly in the eyes. "Our safety comes first." I believed him, utterly. I had never once doubted him, but hearing the logical, protective reasoning behind his invisibility filled the last remaining cracks in my heart with a profound sense of trust. I felt safe. It was a feeling that lasted for approximately 10 minutes. The peace was shattered by the sharp, insistent buzz of my phone on the coffee table. The screen lit up. The name displayed was Mom. A fresh wave of nausea washed over me. I ignored it. It buzzed again and again. After the 4th missed call, a notification popped up. New voicemail. Against my better judgment, a morbid curiosity made me reach for it. I pressed play, putting the phone on speaker, somehow wanting Alexander to be a witness to the madness I had endured. My mother's voice filled the serene penthouse, and it was a performance worthy of an Oscar. It was laced with theatrical panic, crocodile tears, and a venomous self-righteousness. "Olivia, thank God, I was so worried. Your father and I have been doing some digging. We've been calling everyone we know." "There's nothing, Olivia, do you hear me? Nothing. This man is a phantom. He's a con artist, can't you see that? He's playing you for a fool. How much more shame can you possibly bring upon this family? I demand that you come home this instant before you cause another catastrophe." The message ended. The silence that followed was thick with the poison she had just spewed into our sanctuary. Every word was a deliberate, calculated strike. No apology, no remorse. Just the same old accusations, the same toxic manipulation, amplified to a hysterical new pitch. She had seen the helicopter. She had seen the man. And she still chose to believe her own malicious narrative. It was insane. The small, fragile sense of peace I had found just moments before was shattered, replaced by a cold, hard rage. Before I could even react, Alexander leaned forward, his face a mask of calm, controlled fury. He picked up my phone, his movements precise and deliberate. He pressed and held the power button until the screen went black. "That's enough," he said, his voice quiet but absolutely resolute. He placed the inert phone back on the table, face down. She doesn't get to reach you here. They don't get to do this to you anymore. He stood up and walked over to the window, looking out at the city lights. Tomorrow, he said, his back still to me. Tomorrow, we face them. But we do it on your terms, in a place of your choosing. He turned around, his eyes locking with mine, and in them, I saw an unbreakable promise. Tonight, you rest. I promise you, Olivia. From this moment on, you will never have to fight a battle alone again. His words were a shield, extinguishing the fire of my mother's hateful message. I looked at him, this man who had descended from the sky and now stood as the sole guardian of my broken heart. And I knew that tomorrow, the war would finally come to an end. But this time, I wouldn't be the only soldier on the field. Alexander kept his promise. The next morning, it was I who initiated contact. After a restful, uninterrupted sleep, I woke up feeling a sense of calm clarity I hadn't felt in years. I was the one who called my mother. My voice was even, my tone professional, as I informed her that Alexander and I would meet them at 10 a.m. I chose the venue, the Daily, a trendy, upscale coffee shop on King Street that was always bustling. It was neutral territory, a public space. It was my battlefield, and I was choosing the terrain. When my family arrived, they were a united front of simmering hostility. My father, my mother, Amelia, and Bradley walked in together, their expressions grim and determined. They looked less like a family coming for coffee and more like a prosecution team arriving at a trial. They found us already seated at a large table near the window, 2 cups of artisan coffee between us. We looked relaxed, composed. The psychological advantage was already ours. My father didn't bother with pleasantries. He sat down opposite Alexander, his briefcase clicking shut on the table with a sound of finality. "We're glad you agreed to meet," he began, his voice low and prosecutorial. "Because this charade is over. We spent all night on the phone. We called everyone we know in Washington, in finance. Nobody has ever heard of you, Sterling. Nobody." Bradley leaned forward, trying to look intimidating. "The private jet, the fancy watch. It's a good scam, I'll give you that. But it's over. We're giving you one chance to walk away from Olivia and disappear before we call the police and have you investigated for fraud." They were so confident, so absolutely certain in their self-righteous crusade to save me from the life I had chosen. They hadn't learned a single thing. They saw the evidence of Alexander's power, and their materialistic minds could only process it in one way. It had to be a trick. Through it all, Alexander just listened, his expression calm, almost serene. He took a slow sip of his coffee before placing the cup down gently. Then, he smiled. It was a terrifyingly pleasant smile. "Richard," he said, his tone perfectly reasonable, "I completely understand your concern. As a father, you have a right to be protective." He then took out his phone, his movements unhurried. "In fact, I want to help you with your due diligence." With a few taps, he looked up. "I've just sent an email to the 4 of you. You should receive it now." As if on cue, 4 phones buzzed on the table. My mother, father, Amelia, and Bradley all looked down, their faces illuminated by the screens. I watched them as they read. I saw 4 expressions of smug certainty slowly curdle into confusion and then into disbelief. The email wasn't a defense. It was an arsenal. On the screen was a simple list. It contained the private direct line cell phone numbers for the current Secretary of Defense, 2 senators on the Armed Services Committee, the CEOs of Raytheon and Boeing, and a half-dozen other names that were titans of industry and government. Attached to the email were redacted copies of multi-billion-dollar contracts between Sterling Dynamics and the U.S. Department of Defense. Alexander leaned back in his chair. "Please," he said, his voice a soft, dangerous invitation. "Don't take my word for it. Pick a name, any name on that list, and give them a call. Ask about me." The 4 of them just stared at their phones, then at Alexander, then back at their phones. They were trapped. To refuse the offer would be to admit defeat. To accept it was to risk total humiliation. My father, a man whose entire identity was built on pride, couldn't back down. His hands were trembling slightly, but he squared his shoulders. His eyes scanned the list, looking for a name he could trust, a name that was unimpeachable. He found one. General Mattis, he said, his voice a dry rasp. I'll call General James Mattis. It was a smart choice. Mad Dog, Mattis, the revered four-star general and former Secretary of Defense, a public figure of immense integrity. Alexander just nodded. An excellent choice. My father stabbed at the screen with a shaky finger. The call connected. General Mattis, sir, my name is Richard Pearson, he began, his voice overly formal. He stood up and walked stiffly towards the front of the coffee shop for a semblance of privacy, his back to us. The rest of us sat in a silence so thick I could feel it pressing on my eardrums. My mother was twisting her napkin into shreds. Amelia was staring blankly at the street outside. Bradley was studying the tabletop as if it held the secrets of the universe. Alexander, for his part, simply took another sip of his coffee. The seconds ticked by, each one an eternity. It felt like waiting for a verdict. Finally, after what felt like a lifetime, but was probably only 3 minutes, my father turned around. The change in him was staggering. The arrogant, accusatory man who had walked out was gone. In his place was a stooped, diminished figure. His face was the color of chalk. He walked back to the table with the unsteady gait of a much older man and collapsed into his chair. He didn't look at Alexander. He didn't look at his wife or his other daughter. He looked at me. And for the first time in my entire life, I saw something in my father's eyes I had never seen before. Awe. It's true, he whispered, the words barely audible. His voice was hollow, stripped of all its bluster. It's all true. He swallowed hard. General Mattis, he said Alexander Sterling is one of this country's quiet heroes. He took a ragged breath, his gaze still fixed on my face. And then he said that Captain Olivia Pearson is one of the finest, most brilliant young officers he's ever had the privilege of knowing. The confession hung in the air, a final, definitive judgment. My mother let out a small, strangled gasp. Amelia's eyes filled with tears of shame. They had been so wrong, so profoundly, catastrophically, humiliatingly wrong. And the truth hadn't just come from the man they'd called a fraud. It had come from the mouth of a hero, a man they revered. There was nowhere left for them to hide. The trial was over, and they had lost. The truth once spoken left a vacuum in its wake. The battle was won. But looking at the 4 shattered faces across the table, I realized the war wasn't over. A new, more complicated question hung in the heavy silence of the coffee shop. What now? The magnificent structure of Pearson pride, the one they had built over generations, had been leveled to the ground in a matter of minutes, and they were left sitting in the rubble. My father, Richard, the unshakable patriarch, sat slumped in his chair, looking older than I had ever seen him. Bradley, the master of smug confidence, was staring down at his own hands as if he'd never seen them before. And my mother, Eleanor, finally broke. The sound was quiet at first, a hitching breath. Then she covered her face with her hands and began to weep. But these weren't her usual tears of frustration or manipulation. These were the ragged, ugly sobs of genuine shame. It was my father who spoke first, his voice a gravelly ruin of its former self. He didn't look at Alexander. He looked only at me. Olivia, he said, and my name sounded like a foreign word in his mouth. I am sorry. He shook his head, a gesture of profound defeat. There are no excuses for how I've behaved. I failed. As a father, I failed you. The confession coming from a man who had never admitted to being wrong about anything in his life was as shocking as the helicopter landing. It broke the spell. My mother looked up, her face blotchy, her mascara running. He's right, she whispered through her tears. We were awful, just awful. I'm so sorry, my baby. Amelia just stared at me, her own eyes glistening with unshed tears. I'm sorry, Olivia, she managed, her voice barely audible. Their apologies were clumsy, broken, and utterly devoid of their usual polished grace. For the first time, they felt real. For a long moment, I said nothing. I just listened. Alexander placed his hand gently on my arm, a silent message of support. But he knew this was my moment. The old Olivia would have rushed to comfort them, to smooth things over, to say, "It's okay," just to end the unbearable discomfort. But I wasn't the old Olivia anymore. I took a slow breath, my voice calm and measured when I finally spoke. "I hear your apologies," I said, and all four of them looked at me with a desperate, hopeful attention. "And I believe you mean them, right now, in this moment." I let that hang in the air before continuing. But words aren't enough. They can't erase 29 years. Trust, I've learned, is earned in drops and lost in buckets. And you have overturned the entire bucket. My tone wasn't angry, it was factual. The voice of a commander outlining the terms of a ceasefire. So, if you are serious about wanting to fix this, it's not going to be a quick or easy process. There are conditions. I saw a flicker of the old defensiveness in my mother's eyes, but my father silenced her with a look. "Whatever you want, Olivia," he said quietly. "Just tell us." "First," I said, leaning forward, "you will make an effort to understand my life. Not the version you've invented, but the real one. You will learn what my rank means. You will ask about my work, and you will listen to the answers. You will respect my career as you respect Amelia's." I turned to Amelia and Bradley. "Second, you will treat Alexander with the respect he deserves. Not because he's wealthy, but because he is the man I love and the man who has shown me more kindness and validation than my own family ever has." I paused, then delivered the final, most important term. "And third, and this is non-negotiable. I need space. I need time. Time to heal from the damage that you inflicted. That means I will contact you when I am ready. You will not call me, you will not text me, and you will not show up unannounced. You will wait. And you will use that time to think about what you've done." I finished, and the silence returned, but this time it was different. It wasn't tense, it was contemplative. I had not screamed or accused. I had simply taken back control. I had set the boundaries. Later that evening, back in the serene quiet of the penthouse, my phone rang. I saw the caller ID and was about to decline it, but something made me answer. It was Amelia. "Hey," she said. Her voice was small, tentative, stripped of its usual confident cadence. "I thought I was clear about the space, Amelia," I said, my voice cool. I know, and I'm sorry," she rushed to say. "This will be the last time, I promise. I couldn't let today end without—" She trailed off, taking a shaky breath, "without saying it properly." I waited. "Liv," she said. And the use of my childhood nickname, a name she hadn't used in over a decade, sent a small jolt through me. "I am so sorry. I was wrong. About everything." I could hear her start to cry softly on the other end of the line. "It's not an excuse," she continued, her voice thick with emotion. "But I need you to know why. The truth is, I was jealous of you." I was so stunned I couldn't speak. Jealous? Of me? "All my life," she explained. "I did exactly what Mom and Dad wanted. I went to the right schools, got the right grades, landed the right job, got the right fiancé. I checked every single box. But you didn't. You walked away. You had the courage to build your own life, a life that had nothing to do with their expectations. You were free." Her voice broke. "And I hated you for it. Because I wasn't. You have a freedom that none of my money or my success could ever buy." Her confession didn't magically heal the wounds of a lifetime. But it was a start. It was a single, authentic drop of trust in a bucket that had been bone dry for so long. It didn't fix everything, but for the first time in as long as I could remember, it opened a small, narrow door to a future I never thought was possible. A future where, just maybe, we could be sisters again. The months that followed our confrontation at the coffee shop were a testament to the power of choice. My family, stripped of their pride and forced to confront the ugliest parts of themselves, had a choice. They could retreat into bitterness, or they could begin the slow, arduous work of rebuilding. To my everlasting surprise, they chose the latter. It didn't happen overnight. It happened in small, deliberate actions, like drops of water slowly refilling the bucket they had overturned. My father, Richard, began to read. I'd call home, and he'd be in his study, not with the Wall Street Journal, but with thick history tomes by Stephen Ambrose. He started asking me questions, real questions, about my work. He wanted to understand the difference between a battalion and a brigade, the strategic importance of a supply depot. For the first time, he spoke my language, his curiosity clumsy but achingly sincere. My mother, Eleanor, in a move that shocked me most of all, joined a local chapter of Blue Star Families, a support network for military families. She, who had once seen my career as an embarrassment, was now spending her Tuesday evenings listening to the stories of other Army moms, learning about the unique challenges and sacrifices they faced. She started sending me care packages, not with cash, but with things I actually needed. Good coffee, thick wool socks, and homemade cookies that tasted of a childhood I barely remembered. Even Amelia and Bradley changed. They channeled their formidable legal skills into action. Once a month, they began hosting a pro bono legal clinic for veterans, helping them navigate the labyrinthine VA system and fight for the benefits they had earned. They were using their privilege not for themselves, but for others. They weren't just saying sorry, they were being sorry. The true turning point came 4 months later. I was in my office at Fort Bragg when I received a call from my commanding general. I had been selected for a below-the-zone promotion to major, 2 years ahead of schedule. More than that, I was being given command of my own logistics battalion. At 30, I would be one of the youngest female battalion commanders in the Army. My first call was to Alexander. My second, with a knot of apprehension still in my stomach, was to my family. The reaction on the other end of the line was not the polite, detached interest of the past. It was an explosion of pure, unadulterated joy. That weekend, they threw me a party. Not at their house, but at my favorite steakhouse in Charleston. The toast my father gave that night is a memory I will carry with me forever. He raised his glass, his eyes shining with tears. "To my daughter," he said, his voice thick with emotion, "Major Olivia Pearson, a true leader and the finest woman I know." In that moment, the ghosts of every past slight and every dismissive comment finally faded into nothing. I was home. 6 months after that chaotic engagement party, Alexander and I were married. We didn't choose a grand cathedral or a lavish country club. We chose a place of profound symbolism. At dawn, on a small ferry crossing the Charleston harbor, our closest family and friends watched as we exchanged our vows on the grounds of Fort Sumter, the very place where the first shots of the Civil War were fired. It felt fitting. It was the end of our own Civil War, the beginning of a new era of peace. Amelia was my maid of honor. Her speech was not about our childhood squabbles, but about courage and inspiration. "My sister, Liv," she said, looking at me with an expression of pure love, "is my hero. She taught me that true strength isn't about being perfect. It's about having the courage to be exactly who you are." As my father walked me down the aisle formed by the fort's old cannons, he leaned in and whispered in my ear the words of final healing balm on all the old wounds. "You," he said, "are the greatest achievement of my life." Standing there, holding Alexander's hands, with the American flag snapping in the sea breeze above us, and my family watching with nothing but love in their eyes, I felt a sense of wholeness I had never known was possible. 1 year later, that feeling has only deepened. I'm standing on a stage at Patriots Point, the majestic silhouette of the USS Yorktown aircraft carrier behind me. I'm in my Army service uniform, the gold oak leaves of a major gleaming on my shoulders. Alexander is beside me, his hand holding mine, a quiet, constant source of strength. Today is the official launch of the Pearson Sterling Scholarship Fund, a foundation we created to provide college education for the children of fallen and wounded soldiers. It's our shared mission, a way to build a legacy of service together. In the front row, my family is beaming. My mother is dabbing her eyes with a handkerchief. My father is watching me with an expression of boundless pride. Amelia and Bradley are applauding, their faces alight with joy. They are not just spectators anymore, they are partners. They are on the board of the foundation, their energy and expertise essential to its success. I look at them, my family, rebuilt not on the ashes of the old, but on a new foundation of honesty, respect, and hard-earned love. Then I look out at the harbor, at the morning sun dancing on the water. I once thought that justice was about winning, about proving the people who hurt you wrong. But I see now that the best revenge isn't a victory in battle. It's building a lasting peace. It's having the serenity to accept the past you cannot change, the courage to change the future you can, and the wisdom to know the difference. I didn't have to choose between the woman I was and the family I wanted. Somehow, against all odds, I got to have it all. That day, standing on the stage, I realized my story wasn't just about me anymore. It's for anyone who ever felt like they were on the outside looking in, for anyone who had to build their own definition of worth when the world gave them a different one. Your past doesn't have to be your future. You have the power to lay down your arms and build your own peace. Thank you for being a part of my journey. If this story resonated with you, please consider subscribing and joining our community. Together, we can share more stories of resilience, hope, and the incredible strength it takes to heal.